in Solomon's Israel. Harsh realities of ancient life. Welcome to Fantasy Whisper Stories. Before we begin tonight's journey into ancient Israel, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below to let me know. And if you enjoy historical immersions like this one, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories that blend education with entertainment. Part 1, Morning Awakening. You awaken before dawn on a thin straw mattress laid directly on the packed dirt floor. The darkness is nearly complete, save for the faint glow of dying embers in the central hearth of your single-room stone house. Your back aches from the hard surface. There are no soft mattresses or ergonomic pillows in 10th century BCE Israel. The rough woolen blanket scratches against your skin as you push it aside, and the cool morning air immediately raises goosebumps on your arms. Your nostrils fill with the pungent mixture of smells that define your home. Smoke from the hearth, the earthy scent of the mud mortar between stones, dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, and the unmistakable odor of human bodies. Your family of 7 shares this 20 times 20-foot space. Privacy is a concept that simply doesn't exist in your world. The smell of unwashed bodies is particularly strong. Unlike the daily showers you might be accustomed to in the modern world, most common Israelites bathe fully only on special occasions. Water is precious, especially during the dry season, and needs to be carried from the nearest spring or cistern. Regular bathing, as you know, it would be considered a wasteful luxury. Instead, you might perform a quick washing of hands and face with a small pottery bowl of water that sits on a limestone shelf carved into the wall. Your teeth feel fuzzy and your breath is sour. There are no toothbrushes or minty toothpaste in Solomon's Israel. Instead, you chew on a twig from a carefully selected tree, fraying the end to create a primitive brush. Some people rub their teeth with a mixture of crushed eggshells and olive oil, or scrub with a cloth dipped in vinegar. Dental problems are common, and many adults are missing several teeth. A constant, dull toothache is simply a normal part of life for many. Your bladder is full, so you step outside to relieve yourself in the designated area at the edge of your village. There are no toilets, no plumbing, and no toilet paper. You use smooth stones, leaves, or your left hand, which is why the left hand is never used for eating or greeting. In some wealthier homes in Jerusalem, primitive toilet facilities might exist, usually a stone seat positioned over a cesspit. But for common villagers like yourself, open defecation is the norm, though usually done discreetly away from living areas. As you return to your home, the first light of dawn begins to filter into the village. Your wife, if you are a man, or your husband, if you are a woman, is already awake, rekindling the hearth fire by blowing gently on the embers and adding small twigs and dried dung. Fire is precious. There are no matches or lighters, so maintaining an ember overnight is crucial. If your fire goes out completely, you'll have to visit a neighbor to borrow some flame or use a fire drill A wooden stick rotated rapidly against another piece of wood. To create a new one, a labor-intensive process. The children are stirring now. They sleep all together on another straw mat on the opposite side of the single room. There are no separate bedrooms, no privacy for anyone, not for changing clothes, not for marital relations, not for anything. All bodily functions and family dynamics play out in this shared space. Breakfast is simple and nearly identical every day. A flatbread made from barley flour. Wheat is for the wealthy, baked on a hot stone by the fire, perhaps dipped in olive oil if your family is doing reasonably well. There might be some olives, a few figs, or dates if in season. The children receive small portions. Childhood obesity doesn't exist in this time, but malnutrition is common. Many children suffer from stunted growth and vitamin deficiencies. The water you drink comes from a clay jar that was filled yesterday at the village cistern. It's slightly cloudy and tastes of minerals and clay. There's no concept of water purification beyond letting sediment settle to the bottom. Waterborne diseases are common. Though you don't understand them as such, illness is generally attributed to divine displeasure or evil spirits. After this modest meal, the day's work begins immediately. There is no concept of leisure time for common people. Every waking moment is dedicated to survival tasks and productive labor. If you're a man, you might be a farmer, shepherd, potter, stoneworker, or woodworker. If it's the planting or harvest season and you work the land, you'll head to the terraced fields that climb the Judean hills. The tools you use are primitive by modern standards. A wooden plow reinforced with iron being relatively new technology in Solomon's time. A stone sickle, wooden thrashing sledges. The work is backbreaking, done entirely through human and animal power. If you're a woman, your workday centers around food preparation, childcare, textile production, and water collection. Making enough bread to feed the family is nearly a full-time job itself. You rise early to grind grain using a saddle quern, a concave stone base, and a smaller stone that you push back and forth to crush the grain into flour. This takes hours of physically demanding work. The stone dust mixing with your sweat and getting into your lungs. The constant grinding motion eventually leads to arthritis in your hands and knees, and the stone grit that inevitably gets into the flour gradually wears down your teeth over the years. Your children help with chores from the moment they can walk steadily. By age 5, children are collecting kindling, helping to tend animals, or watching younger siblings. Child mortality is devastatingly high. Nearly half of all children die before reaching adulthood, mostly from diseases that would be easily treatable in the modern world. Every family has experienced the loss of children, a grief that is expected but never fully accepted. The mourning progresses under the increasingly hot Mediterranean sun. There's no sunscreen, just head coverings made of woven plant fibers or wool. Your skin is weathered and aged beyond your years from constant sun exposure. As you work, You scratch at the bites from lice and fleas that are constant companions. There are no effective insecticides, and parasites are simply a fact of life. Bed bugs inhabit your straw mattress, and various intestinal worms likely live inside you, competing for the limited nutrition in your diet. If you're a tradesperson living in one of the larger towns, your workshop might be open to the street, a small space where you practice your craft, from pottery to metalworking to leathercraft. There's no separation between home and work life. Children apprentice with their parents, learning skills through observation and practice rather than formal education. Midday approaches, and the heat becomes intense. Work slows or pauses during the hottest hours. You seek shade and rest, perhaps sharing a simple meal similar to breakfast, more flatbread, perhaps with lentils or chickpeas prepared as a stew, seasoned with locally grown herbs. Meat is a luxury reserved for special occasions or the wealthy. The common people might taste it only a few times a year, usually during religious festivals. The water in your clay jar has warmed considerably under the sun, but there's no refrigeration, no ice, no cold beverages. The concept of a refreshingly cold drink on a hot day simply doesn't exist in your world. As you rest in whatever shade you can find, you might listen to travelers passing through, bringing news from other villages, or even from Jerusalem, where King Solomon's magnificent building projects continue. The temple is complete, a wonder that many common Israelites will hear about, but never see in person. Travel is difficult, dangerous, and something most people do only when absolutely necessary. The conversation turns to taxes. Solomon's building projects and lavish court require substantial resources, and much of that burden falls on the common people. The tax collectors visit regularly, demanding a portion of your harvest or products. This is in addition to the religious tithes expected by the priests. For many families, these combined obligations take nearly half of everything they produce. The talk of taxes reminds you of the corvée, the mandatory labor service required by the king. Every able-bodied man must serve 1 month out of every 3 in the king's labor force, working on construction projects or in the copper mines. The time away from your own fields or workshop puts additional strain on your family's ability to survive. As the worst heat of the day passes, work resumes. The afternoon is filled with more labor, endless, physically demanding tasks that leave your body aching. There are no ergonomic tools, no labor-saving devices. Everything is done by hand, with simple implements that have changed little over centuries. Children play with simple toys, small clay figures, stones, or pieces of wood in between their chores. There are no books, no paper, no writing materials for common people. Literacy is extremely rare outside the priestly and scribal classes. Stories, history, and practical knowledge are transmitted orally, memorized, and passed down through generations. A woman in your village is pregnant. her belly swollen with what will be her sixth child, though only two have survived infancy. There are no prenatal vitamins, no ultrasounds, no medical care as you would recognize it. She will give birth at home with the help of a midwife or experienced women from the village. The risk of death in childbirth is high for both mother and infant. If complications arise, there are few effective interventions available. As afternoon wanes, people begin to gather in the central area of the village. Community is essential for survival, and the end of the workday brings some social interaction. The elders sit together, discussing matters affecting the village disputes over property boundaries, arranging marriages for young people, planning for upcoming religious observances. You notice someone missing from the gathering, an elderly man who had been suffering from a persistent cough. You learn that he died during the day. Death is an ever-present reality in your world, striking at all ages. The average life expectancy is around 35 years, though many die much younger, and some do live into their 60s or even 70s, albeit with numerous physical ailments. There are no hospitals, no doctors as you would recognize them. Healing is practiced by those with knowledge of herbal remedies passed down through generations, often mixed with religious rituals and prayers. Some remedies have actual medicinal properties, while others are ineffective or even harmful. With no understanding of germ theory, infections frequently prove fatal. A simple cut can lead to death if it becomes infected. Broken bones may heal improperly, leaving people permanently disabled. The family of the deceased man has begun preparations for burial, which must happen quickly in this hot climate, with no embalming or refrigeration. The body will be washed, wrapped in a shroud, and placed in a rock-cut tomb, or buried directly in the ground, depending on the family's resources. The mourning rituals will continue for 7 days, with friends and neighbors bringing food to the grieving family and sitting with them in their sorrow. As the sun begins to set, you return to your home. The evening meal is prepared similar to the midday meal, but perhaps with the addition of some fresh vegetables from the small garden plot near your house, depending on the season. Goat's milk might be available if your family keeps goats. No cold milk, though, without refrigeration. Milk must be consumed quickly before it spoils, or be processed into cheese or yogurt. The light inside your stone home is dim, provided only by an olive oil lamp, a simple clay vessel with a wick made from plant fibers. It produces more smoke than light, adding to the perpetual layer of soot that coats the ceiling of your home. There are no bright electric lights, no reading lamps. Activities requiring detailed vision can only be done during daylight hours. As darkness falls completely, there's little to do but prepare for sleep. There's no television, no internet, no books to read, even if you could read. Entertainment comes in the form of storytelling, simple music played on handmade instruments, or conversation. Children might play games with pebbles or bones before settling down for the night. Before sleeping, prayers are offered to Yahweh the God of Israel. Religious observance is woven into every aspect of daily life, with numerous rules governing what you eat, wear, and do. While the temple stands in Jerusalem, most religious practice for common people happens locally, with Sabbath observances and festival celebrations centered around family and community. As you lie down on your straw mattress, your body aching from the day's labor, you reflect on your life in Solomon's Israel. Despite the hardships, or perhaps because of them, there is a strong sense of community, of shared purpose and identity. Life is difficult, often brutally so, but it has a rhythm and meaning that connects you to your ancestors and to the land promised to your people. The flames of the oil lamp are extinguished to conserve precious oil, plunging the home into darkness. Tomorrow will bring another day much like this one, the endless cycle of work, eat, sleep, that defines existence for common people in this ancient time. Part 2, midday in the marketplace. As the sun reaches its zenith, you find yourself in the bustling marketplace of a larger town near your village. These trips are relatively rare, perhaps once every few weeks, as most of your needs are met through your own production or bartering within your small community. But today, you need to trade some of your goods for items you cannot produce yourself. The market is located in an open area near the town gate, a practical location, as it allows merchants from outside to trade without entering the town proper, and gives the town elders, who often sit at the gate, oversight of commercial activities. The noise hits you immediately, a cacophony of human voices haggling, animals bleating and braying, craftspeople hammering and chiseling. There's no background music, no announcements over loudspeakers, just the raw sounds of human commerce. The smell is equally overwhelming, a mixture of animal dung, human sweat, spices, leather, oils, and cooking food. There are no regulations about sanitation or food handling. Flies swarm over food items, and dust kicked up by passing feet settles on everything. You don't think twice about it. This is simply how markets have always been. You navigate the crowded space, careful of your few possessions. Theft is a concern. Though the consequences are severe, amputation of hands for repeated offenders is not uncommon. And most people know each other in these relatively small communities, making anonymity difficult for thieves. Your clothing is simple and functional for men. A knee-length tunic made of rough woven wool or linen, possibly belted at the waist. For women, a longer tunic reaching to the ankles, with perhaps a veil or head covering. The fabric is undyed for most common people. Varying shades of beige and brown are the norm. Only the wealthy can afford the expensive dyed fabrics in purple, scarlet, or blue. Your sandals are simple leather soles tied to your feet with thongs, providing minimal protection from the rocky ground. Many children and the poorest adults go barefoot entirely, their feet calloused and cracked. You've brought items to trade, perhaps some excess produce from your garden, a few clay pots if you're a potter, woven baskets, or a small amount of olive oil. There is coinage in circulation during Solomon's time, but most everyday transactions among common people are still conducted through barter, especially in rural areas. Even in towns, only larger transactions might involve silver shekels, unformed lumps of silver that must be weighed for each transaction. As you negotiate with a trader, you realize how different commerce is from what you're used to in modern times. There are no fixed prices, no price tags, no consumer protections. Every transaction requires extensive haggling, a social ritual with its own rules and expectations. Both parties exaggerate dramatically at first, you underselling the value of what you're asking, the merchant overselling what they're offering. Gradually, through a dance of offers and counteroffers, often accompanied by theatrical displays of shock and disappointment, you reach an agreement. The merchant uses balance scales to weigh out some salt, a valuable commodity used not just for flavoring, but for preserving food, and as a form of currency itself. The word salary comes from the Latin for salt. There's no standardization of weights and measures, despite royal attempts at regulation. Merchants often have two sets of weights, heavier ones for buying, lighter ones for selling. The biblical injunction against different weights and measures speaks to how common this practice was. Next, you seek a copper needle, a small luxury that will make your wife's textile work easier, but something your village blacksmith doesn't produce. You find a metalworker with a small forge set up near the edge of the market. The heat from his fire is intense in the already hot day. He has no protective equipment beyond calloused hands as he works the metal, and you notice burns scars up and down his forearms. His lungs are likely damaged from years of inhaling metal fumes and smoke. But occupational safety is a concept that doesn't exist. The metalworker has been incorporating some ironwork into his crafts, a relatively new technology in this period. Iron is more difficult to work than copper or bronze, but produces stronger tools and weapons. Solomon's Israel is in a transition period, with iron becoming more common, but still somewhat prestigious. The metalworker charges more for iron implements, and you stick with your original plan for a copper needle. Moving through the market, you pass food vendors selling prepared items, bread, roasted grains, or stewed lentils. If you're hungry, you might purchase something, but there's no health inspection, no hand-washing stations, no refrigeration. Food poisoning is a common occurrence, one of many gastrointestinal ailments that regularly affect the population. You overhear fragments of conversation as you move through the crowd, farmers discussing the worrying lack of rain so far this season, merchants talking about new trade opportunities since Solomon's peace treaties with neighboring kingdoms have made roads safer, women exchanging news about births, deaths, and marriages in nearby villages. There's also talk of Solomon's many wives and concubines, hundreds of women, many of them foreign princesses brought to Jerusalem as part of diplomatic alliances. Some people whisper concerns about the foreign religious practices these women have brought with them, wondering if these have influenced the king himself. Others speak with pride about Solomon's legendary wisdom and the grandeur of his court, even if common people never witness it directly. Near a corner of the marketplace, you notice a cluster of people gathered around an older man seated on a low stool. He's a storyteller, a valued figure in this primarily oral culture. For a small payment, he recites tales from Israel's history, the exodus from Egypt, the conquest of Canaan, the time of the judges, the rise of King David. His animated voice rises and falls dramatically, holding his audience captive. For many common people, this is their primary connection to their own history and religious traditions, since they cannot read the scrolls maintained by the priests. Beyond the storyteller, a more sobering scene unfolds. A young man stands with his hands bound, surrounded by stern-faced elders. He's been accused of stealing livestock, a serious crime in an agricultural society where animals represent significant wealth and livelihood. Justice is swift and often harsh in Solomon's time. The penalties range from paying multiple times the value of what was stolen. If the person has the means, to enslavement for debt, or even execution for repeat or serious offenses. The concept of prison as punishment is largely unknown. Confinement might be used to hold someone until judgment or execution, but not as a long-term penalty itself. Instead, restitution, corporal punishment, enslavement, banishment, or execution are the common forms of justice. The accused often has little opportunity to defend themselves beyond their own testimony, and perhaps the support of family members willing to speak for their character. Moving away from this unsettling scene, you approach a merchant selling clay vessels. Some contain oils, olive oil for cooking and lighting, and more expensive scented oils used for personal grooming by those who can afford them. There are no commercial soaps as you would recognize them. Personal cleansing involves rubbing the skin with oil, then scraping it off with a curved tool called a strigil, taking the surface dirt with it. Alternatively, ash from cooking fires mixed with oil serves as a rough cleansing agent. Nearby, another vendor displays her textile goods, woolen and linen fabrics in various weaves. The process of creating these textiles is extraordinarily labor-intensive. For wool, sheep must be raised and sheared, the wool washed, combed, spun into thread using a drop spindle. A constant activity for women whenever their hands aren't otherwise occupied. And finally, woven on a vertical loom. Linen follows a similar process, but starts with harvesting flax plants, soaking them to rot away the fleshy parts, a foul-smelling process, beating the fibers, spinning, and weaving. The merchant's higher quality fabrics are quite expensive, reflecting the immense labor involved in their creation. Only the wealthy can afford to purchase ready-made textiles in quantity. Most common households produce much of their own fabric, with women spending a significant portion of their lives in textile production, making this one of the most time-consuming aspects of ancient life. As you continue through the market, you pass an area where slaves are being sold. Slavery is a common institution in Solomon's Israel, as it is throughout the ancient world. People become slaves through various means: captives in warfare, indentured servitude for debt, or being born to slave parents. The biblical law makes distinctions between Hebrew and non-Hebrew slaves, with Hebrew slaves having more rights and typically serving limited terms, while foreign slaves could be owned permanently. The site reminds you of the fragility of freedom in this society. A few bad harvests, a significant debt, or a military defeat could result in you or your family members being sold into slavery. This awareness lives in the back of your mind, influencing decisions about risk-taking and resource management. Near the edge of the market, you notice a group of men sitting in the shade, their skin marked with unusual scars and discolorations. They are kept apart from the main crowd. These are people suffering from various skin diseases, some of which might be leprosy. With no effective medical treatments, social isolation is the primary response to such conditions. The afflicted are considered ritually unclean and often must live in separate communities outside town walls, announcing their approach with calls of unclean, unclean, so others can avoid them. This reminds you of the precariousness of health in your world. An injury or illness that would be minor in modern times can become a life-altering or life-ending event. There are no antibiotics, no surgery as you would recognize it, no pain management beyond wine, mandrake, or similar mild narcotics that do little for severe pain. A broken bone might heal improperly, leaving someone permanently disabled. A deep cut can lead to infection and death. Childbirth complications regularly kill women. Many common infections and diseases have no effective treatments. Some people wear amulets or carry small objects believed to ward off illness or bring good fortune. Despite the official religion's prohibitions against such practices, many common Israelites blend their Yahweh worship with older folk practices and superstitions. Life is too precarious not to seek protection through multiple channels. The sun beats down mercilessly as midday approaches. There's no modern sunscreen, no sunglasses, no air conditioning. Heat stroke is a real danger, especially for the elderly or those already weakened by illness or malnutrition. You seek shade whenever possible and conserve your energy during the hottest part of the day, as do most others. The rhythm of the market changes as midday approaches. Activity slows as people seek shade and rest. Food vendors do more business as people look for their midday meal. You might purchase some bread and lentils, or perhaps a piece of salted fish if you've had a particularly successful trading day. You find a shaded spot to rest and eat your simple meal. The taste is familiar, but would seem bland to a modern palate. Limited spices, no sugar, no artificial flavors or flavor enhancers. Salt is the primary seasoning, with some herbs for the fortunate. flavors are honest and straightforward. The nutty taste of barley bread, the earthiness of lentils, the sharpness of onions or garlic, if available. As you eat, you observe a group of men engaged in animated discussion. They're debating the merits of Solomon's heavy taxation and forced labor practices. Some defend the king, pointing to the increased trade and relative peace that has benefited Israel during his reign, allowing for prosperity not known in previous generations. Others grumble about the burden placed on common people to support the king's ambitious building projects and lavish court. Their conversation reflects a tension in Solomon's kingdom that will eventually lead to its division after his death. The gap between the increased national prestige and wealth versus the burden this places on ordinary citizens. While Solomon's reign is remembered as a golden age, the seeds of its dissolution are already present in the economic strain on the common people. You finish your meal and prepare for the return journey to your village before the heat of the day makes travel unbearable. You've traded successfully for the items you needed: salt, a copper needle, perhaps some spices, or small luxury items that will brighten your family's otherwise monotonous diet and lifestyle. The walk back to your village will take over an hour on uneven, unpaved roads. There are no cars, no bicycles, not even wheeled carts for most common people. Those are used primarily for agriculture or by merchants. Most people travel everywhere on foot, developing tough feet and strong legs from a lifetime of walking. The concept of daily exercise would seem absurd to you. Life itself is constant physical exertion. As you leave the town, you pass a group of laborers working on reinforcing the town wall under the supervision of a royal official. These men are fulfilling their corvée obligation, the mandatory labor service required by the king. Every Israelite man must serve 1 month in 3 in the royal labor force, working on construction projects, in mines, or other royal enterprises. This system allows Solomon to complete his ambitious building programs without maintaining a year-round paid workforce. But it places considerable strain on families when adult men are absent during crucial agricultural seasons. The men look exhausted, working with primitive tools under the hot sun. Some show signs of injury: crushed fingers, deep cuts, broken bones that have healed badly. Workplace safety doesn't exist as a concept, and injuries are common. If a worker is seriously injured and can no longer perform labor, there's no workers' compensation, no disability payments. Their families must support them, or they join the ranks of beggars if they have no family network. You're grateful to have completed your own corvée service last month and have 2 more months before you'll be called again. The memory of the grueling labor and harsh conditions is still fresh, a reminder of your position in the social hierarchy of Solomon's kingdom. The road back to your village takes you past agricultural fields, where terraced hillsides make the most of the limited flat land in the Judean hill country. The terraces are an impressive feat of engineering, creating level growing areas on otherwise unusable slopes, and helping to conserve precious water by preventing runoff. Some of these terraces have been maintained for generations, representing countless hours of human labor in moving stones and soil. Farmers work their fields with simple tools, wooden plows reinforced with metal tips, hoes made from wood and copper or iron, sickles for harvesting. All agricultural work is done by human and animal power. There are no tractors, no harvesters, no irrigation pumps. Watering, when necessary, involves carrying water in clay jars from the nearest source, an incredibly labor-intensive process that limits what can be grown, especially during the dry season. As you walk, you reflect on the stark differences between life in town and in your small village. The town offers more opportunities for trade and specialized goods, but also more exposure to diseases with its greater population density and waste management challenges. Your village is more limited in resources, but provides a tighter community where everyone knows and usually supports each other. The path narrows as you approach your village, winding between boulders and scrubby vegetation. There are no paved roads here, just dirt paths worn by generations of feet. During the rainy season, these paths turn to mud, making travel treacherous and sometimes impossible. During the dry season, as now, dust coats everything: your skin, your clothing, your hair, the goods you carry. You approach your village with the sun still high, but past its zenith. The familiar sight of simple stone houses clustered together on the hillside, the terraced fields surrounding the settlement, the communal thrashing floor on a flat area where the breeze helps separate grain from chaff, all signal that you're home. Children playing near the village edge spot you and run to greet you, curious about what you've brought from the market. They're simple games, playing with stones, clay figurines, or improvised balls made from rags, require no specialized toys or equipment. Their entertainment comes from their imagination and interaction with each other, a stark contrast to the screen-based entertainment of modern children. As you enter the village, you notice a group gathered around the communal olive press. The olive harvest is still months away, but maintenance work needs to be done on the heavy stone that is used to crush the olives. This is communal work. Everyone participates because everyone benefits from the press during olive season. It's another example of how interdependent life is in your small community. There are no individualists here. Survival depends on cooperation and shared labor. You return to your home, ready to share what you've acquired and the news you've heard in town. The simple stone structure looks stark and primitive compared to modern housing, but it represents security and belonging in your world. Despite the hardships of life in Solomon's Israel, there is a sense of place and purpose that anchors your existence, something often missing in the more comfortable, but sometimes disconnected modern world. Part 3, Evening and Family Life. You return home from the marketplace as the afternoon begins to wane. The simple stone structure you call home appears on the horizon, a one-room building with walls of rough fieldstone held together with mud mortar, and a flat roof made of wooden beams covered with branches, reeds, and a layer of packed clay. In the rainy season, this roof will leak despite your best efforts at maintenance, creating muddy patches on the dirt floor below. As you approach, you notice your wife sitting on a stone in front of the house, working a drop spindle with practiced motions, twisting wool into thread, an activity that occupies nearly every spare moment for women. The thread will eventually be woven into fabric for clothing and household use. Beside her, your two youngest children play with small clay figurines they've made themselves, while your older daughters help prepare the evening meal. Your oldest son, now 12, has been working in the fields with his uncle while you were at the market. In Solomon's Israel, childhood as a protected time of play and education doesn't exist as you might recognize it. Children begin contributing to household labor as soon as they're physically capable, usually around age 4 or 5, and by their early teens are considered essentially adults with adult responsibilities. You call out a greeting as you approach. Your wife looks up, visibly relieved at your safe return. Travel, even to a nearby market town, carries risks, bandits on isolated paths, accidents with no medical care available, wild animals in some areas. Each separation brings anxiety until the family is reunited. You display the items acquired at the market: salt, the copper needle, perhaps some spices, or other small luxuries. These modest purchases are received with genuine appreciation. In a world with so few material comforts, even small improvements to daily life are significant. Inside your home, preparations for the evening meal are underway. The primary cooking facilities consist of a hearth with stones arranged to support cooking vessels, and a clay tabun, oven for baking bread. There's no range with temperature controls, no microwave, no refrigerator. Cooking is done over an open fire, requiring constant attention to maintain proper heat. The smoke vents poorly through a hole in the roof, and the interior of your home is perpetually smoky, causing respiratory problems for many, especially the elderly. Tonight's meal is a hearty stew of lentils and onions, flavored with wild herbs gathered by the children earlier in the day. There are no tomatoes, potatoes, corn, or many other vegetables you might consider staples in the modern world. These were native to the Americas and unknown in ancient Israel. Instead, your diet centers around grains, primarily barley for commoners, legumes, olive oil, and seasonal Mediterranean fruits and vegetables. Your wife adds some of the newly acquired salt to the stew, using it sparingly as the precious commodity it is. The meal contains no meat that's reserved for special occasions, perhaps once every few weeks at most for common people. The protein in your diet comes primarily from legumes, with occasional eggs, cheese, or fish if you live near water sources. The pottery cooking vessels and eating utensils are handmade, probably by someone in your village who specializes in pottery. There are no factory-produced mass-produced goods with consistent quality, everything shows the marks of human creation, with all the irregularities that implies. Your family eats from simple clay bowls, using pieces of flatbread to scoop up the stew. There are no forks. Those won't be common for another 2 millennia. Some people use wooden spoons or knives, but fingers are the primary eating utensils. Your family gathers around the central area of the home to eat. There's no dining table as you might know it. You sit on stone benches built into the walls, on floor mats, or simply on the packed earth floor. The meal is eaten relatively quickly. There's no concept of lingering over dinner as a social occasion. Eating is primarily about sustenance. Water is the typical beverage, though there might be fermented beverages on special occasions. Wine exists, but is often watered down and reserved for celebrations or religious observances for common people. The water itself comes from the village cistern, a large basin cut into rock that collects rainwater during the wet season. In the dry season, as water levels drop, the quality deteriorates, becoming increasingly stagnant and filled with sediment. As you eat, your family shares the events of their day. Your wife tells of a dispute between neighbors over a wandering goat that damaged a garden. Your oldest daughter mentions that the widow who lives nearby seems unwell, and people have been taking turns bringing her food. Your son excitedly reports seeing a fox near the fields. This informal exchange of information serves an important social function in a world without written records, newspapers, or electronic communications. News travels exclusively by word of mouth, and community awareness depends on this constant flow of verbal updates. After the meal, your wife takes some leftover stew to the ailing widow, part of the strong communal support system that exists out of necessity. There's no government social safety net, no insurance, no retirement plans. Extended family and neighbors are the only support structure for those who cannot fully care for themselves, the elderly, the ill, the disabled, or those who have lost family members. As evening deepens, you sit outside your home with several male neighbors, discussing matters affecting the community, the condition of the village cistern, when to begin the barley harvest, rumors of Philistine movements to the west. Women gather separately, continuing their textile work even as they talk, using every available moment of fatting light for productive labor. This gender separation is rigid in Solomon's Israel. Men and women occupy distinct social spheres with clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Men handle external matters, agriculture, construction, interactions with authorities, travel to markets. Women manage domestic concerns, food preparation, childcare, textile production, water collection. These divisions aren't seen as political or cultural choices, but as the natural order established by divine will. Marriage in your world bears little resemblance to modern concepts of matrimony. Marriages are arranged by families, often when children are quite young, and are primarily economic alliances between families rather than romantic unions. Girls typically marry in their early to mid-teens, boys somewhat later when they can economically support a household. Your own marriage was arranged by your father and your wife's father when she was just 8 years old, though the marriage wasn't consummated until she reached puberty around age 13. There was no elaborate wedding ceremony, as is common in modern times. A contractual agreement between families, a simple blessing, and the bride's move to the groom's household constituted the process. Despite the pragmatic nature of marriage arrangements, affection and partnership do develop between many spouses. Years of shared hardship and cooperation create deep bonds. However, the relationship remains fundamentally unequal, with wives legally and socially subordinate to their husbands. Divorce is possible, but primarily a male prerogative, and leaves women in a precarious position unless they can return to their birth families. As the light fades completely, the activities of the day wind down. Without abundant artificial lighting, most work and social activity ceases at sunset. The oil lamps provide only dim, localized light, and the precious olive oil is used sparingly. Most people simply adjust their sleep cycles to match the natural rhythms of daylight and darkness. Before the family settles for sleep, you lead them in prayers to Yahweh. Religious observance is not a distinct part of life, but integrated into every aspect of existence. Your understanding of God's law comes not from personal reading of scrolls. You're illiterate, as are most common people, but from oral teaching at synagogue gatherings, from traveling Levites who occasionally visit villages, and from the traditions passed down through generations. The religious calendar provides the primary framework for marking time. Rather than thinking in terms of months and dates as we do, you orient yourself by festivals and observances. Passover, the Feast of Weeks, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles. These celebrations break the monotony of daily life and provide touchstones for the community's shared identity. Your children settle onto their sleeping mats, the younger ones quickly falling asleep after a day full of physical activity. The older children might talk quietly before drifting off, but there's no reading before bed, no bedtime stories from printed books. Instead, oral storytelling, tales of ancestors, folk wisdom, and religious narratives serves both entertainment and educational purposes. You and your wife sit in the dim light of a single oil lamp for a few more moments, discussing household matters in low voices. There's concern about the youngest child's persistent cough, worry over whether the stored grain will last until harvest, planning for the upcoming religious festival that requires a trip to the regional shrine. Your wife mentions that your neighbor's daughter, just 14, is pregnant with her first child. Childbearing begins early in this society, and women spend much of their adult lives either pregnant or nursing. With high infant mortality rates, having many children is both an economic necessity and a response to the likelihood that several will not survive to adulthood. contraception is rudimentary and often ineffective, certain herbs believed to reduce fertility, extended nursing of infants, and coitus interruptus being the primary methods. Family planning as a concept would seem strange. Children are universally seen as blessings, additional hands for labor, and security for parents in old age. Your wife extinguishes the oil lamp, plunging the home into near-complete darkness. Moonlight filters weakly through the small window openings, providing just enough illumination to make out shadows and silhouettes. You lie on your sleeping mat, the straw crackling beneath you, your back aching from another day of physical labor. Sleep doesn't come immediately. Despite exhaustion, your mind turns to concerns about the coming season, whether the rains will be sufficient, whether the tax collectors will demand more than you can spare, whether your family will remain healthy. There are no safety nets in your world, no insurance policies, no emergency funds beyond what food you've managed to store, and what goodwill you've built within your community. Eventually, sleep claims you, but it's lighter and more interrupted than modern sleep patterns. Without soft mattresses, temperature control, or protection from insects, truly deep and comfortable sleep is rare. Most people in your time nap during the hot midday hours and sleep in two main segments during the night, with a period of wakefulness in between, a pattern common before artificial lighting changed human sleep cycles. During these wakeful night hours, some productive work might be done by lamplight if urgently needed, or couples might have their most private conversations, or people might simply lie quietly, listening to the sounds of the night, distant animal calls, the breathing of family members, the occasional cry of an infant in another house. The night is not entirely peaceful. Ancient Israel was home to predators, jackals, foxes, and occasionally wolves, or even lions in some regions. You might hear their calls in the distance, a reminder of the thin boundary between the ordered human world and the wilderness beyond. Walls, fire, and community are your primary protections against the dangers of the night. Inside your home, other predators may be active mice, rats, scorpions, spiders, and various insects. There are no effective pest control methods, and cohabitation with these creatures is simply accepted. Scorpion stings and spider bites are common hazards, occasionally fatal to small children or those already weakened by age or illness. Eventually, before dawn, you drift back into deeper sleep for the final hours of night. The rhythm of your sleep is not governed by alarm clocks or work schedules, but by the natural cycle of light and dark, modified by the demands of animal husbandry. If you keep goats or sheep, their needs must be attended to at first light, regardless of season. Dreams in ancient Israel carry significant cultural weight, believed to sometimes contain divine messages or prophetic insights. If you experience a particularly unusual or vivid dream, you might share it with family members or even community elders for interpretation. There's no concept of dreams as merely the brain's processing of daily experiences. They are seen as potentially meaningful communications from beyond the ordinary world. Before dawn breaks, the roosters begin to crow, one of the most reliable timepieces in your world. Their calls signal that another day of labor is about to begin. Another cycle in the endless rhythm of subsistence living that defines life for common people in Solomon's Israel. As you prepare to rise, your body reminds you of its limitations, joints stiff from sleeping on the hard surface, muscles sore from yesterday's labor, perhaps a tooth aching or a cut that's become inflamed. There are no anti-inflammatory medications, no antibiotics, no modern dental care. Minor ailments that would be easily treated in the modern world are simply endured until they resolve naturally or worsen into serious conditions. Despite these discomforts, you rise to face another day. There is grain to grind, fields to tend, water to fetch, maintenance to perform on tools and structures. The work of survival never ceases, offering little margin for extended rest or recuperation. Yet amid this harshness, there are moments of profound connection to family, to community, to traditions that stretch back generations, to the land itself. The rhythms of agricultural life, while demanding, provide a sense of continuity and purpose. The close interdependence of community members creates bonds rarely experienced in more individualistic modern societies. Religion provides not just moral guidance, but explanations for otherwise bewildering natural phenomena and comfort in the face of hardships. The cycle of religious observances gives structure to the year and momentary respite from the monotony of daily labor. The sense of divine oversight, while sometimes manifesting as fear of punishment for transgressions, also offers reassurance that the world has order and meaning. As you move through the pre-dawn darkness to begin another day, you carry this complex mixture of hardship and belonging, of physical struggle and spiritual framework that defines existence for ordinary people in the time of Solomon. Your life would seem unimaginably difficult to modern observers, lacking nearly every comfort and convenience we take for granted. Yet, it possesses a directness of experience and clarity of purpose that might seem equally foreign to those accustomed to more complex, but perhaps more abstracted modern lives. Part 4: Religious Life and Spiritual Practices. The Sabbath day dawns differently than other mornings in your village. As the first light breaks over the Judean hills, there is a notable absence of the usual sounds of labor. No hammering from the carpenter's workshop, no grinding of grain, no bleating of animals being led to pasture. This seventh day is set apart, a day of rest commanded by Yahweh himself. For you and your family, the Sabbath represents not just religious obligation, but a welcome respite from the relentless physical labor that characterizes every other day. Even so, your understanding of rest would seem strange to modern observers. Certain tasks remain necessary for survival and are permitted, feeding and watering animals, tending to the ill, and preparing minimal food. Your family rises later than usual this morning, the luxury of additional sleep itself, a form of Sabbath observance. The preparations were made yesterday, extra bread baked, water drawn, the Sabbath meal partially prepared, so that minimal work would be needed today. The prohibitions against work on the Sabbath are taken seriously, though interpretations of what constitutes work vary across communities and evolve over time. After a simple breakfast, you and your family prepare to walk to the village gathering place for communal worship. There are no grand synagogues or local temples in rural villages during Solomon's time. Those architectural developments will come later in Jewish history. Instead, the community gathers in an open space, perhaps under a large tree for shade, or in the home of a respected elder during inclement weather. Your clothing for the Sabbath is the best you own, not an extensive wardrobe by any means, but garments that are less patched, cleaner, and perhaps of slightly finer material than your everyday wear. For most common people, this might mean simply a newer tunic that hasn't yet been mended multiple times, or a head covering saved for special occasions. The village gathering begins with the Shema, the central affirmation of Israelite faith. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. This declaration sets the Israelite religion apart from the polytheistic practices of neighboring peoples, while archaeology suggests that some early Israelites may have worshipped Yahweh alongside a female consort or other deities. By Solomon's time, the official religion is firmly centered on the worship of Yahweh alone, though this monotheism is still developing, and not yet as absolute as it will become in later centuries. An elder reads from a scroll, a rare and precious object in your community. Few villages would possess their own religious scrolls. Instead, they might be brought periodically by traveling Levites or scribes. Most of your religious knowledge comes through oral transmission rather than direct access to texts. You cannot read the scroll yourself. Literacy is confined primarily to priests, scribes, and the royal court. Even most wealthy merchants and landowners are illiterate or minimally literate. Written language serves administrative, commercial, and religious elite functions, rather than being a widespread means of communication. The reading is in Hebrew, the sacred language, though your everyday speech might include Canaanite dialectal influences, reflective of the complex linguistic landscape of the region. The passages read typically come from what will later be known as the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, containing the foundational laws, narratives, and covenant agreements of Israel's relationship with Yahweh. After the reading, an elder or visiting Levite offers interpretation and application. These explanations are crucial since the complexities of the law require guidance for proper observance. Without this oral teaching, the written text alone would be insufficient for guiding religious practice, even if more people could read it. religious instruction often has very practical applications rules for maintaining ritual purity, proper treatment of neighbors and family members, agricultural practices, and food preparation. Religion is not a separate sphere of life, distinct from secular concerns. It permeates every aspect of daily existence. Following the teaching, prayers are offered for the community's needs, rainfall for crops, protection from enemies, healing for the sick, blessing upon the king and nation. These prayers reflect the immediate concerns of an agricultural society living with minimal technological buffers against environmental challenges. Communal singing forms another important part of worship. The songs are passed down orally, with melodies and lyrics preserved through communal memory rather than written notation. Some may be portions of what will later be collected as the Book of Psalms, attributed traditionally to King David, though many are local compositions or adaptations. The instruments accompanying worship are simple hand drums, cymbals, and perhaps a kinnor, a type of lyre. There are no organs, pianos, or complex instrumental arrangements. The music is rhythmic and vocal-centered, designed for communal participation rather than performance by specialists. After the formal gathering concludes, the community remains together for much of the day. The Sabbath is as much about communal solidarity as religious observance. News is shared, disputes are addressed, marriages are arranged, and community decisions are made. This social function is particularly important in a world without mass communication or formal governance structures at the local level. Religious observance extends beyond the weekly Sabbath to encompass a calendar of festivals and observances tied to agricultural cycles and historical commemorations. The three major pilgrim festivals, Passover in spring, Shavuot weeks in early summer, and Sukkot tabernacles in autumn, mark the agricultural year and commemorate formative events in Israel's history. For ordinary Israelites during Solomon's time, these festivals involve both local celebrations and, when possible, pilgrimages to regional shrines, or even to Jerusalem to visit the newly constructed temple. However, such journeys are difficult and expensive, meaning many common people would make the pilgrimage only occasionally, or perhaps once in a lifetime. The temple in Jerusalem, Solomon's crowning architectural achievement, stands as the center of official religious life, yet remains distant from the everyday experience of most Israelites. Built with forced labor and extravagant resources, cedar from Lebanon, gold overlays, bronze fixtures, it represents the pinnacle of Israel's newfound national prestige under Solomon. For rural villagers, the temple exists more as a concept than a lived experience. Stories of its grandeur circulate through the countryside, tales of the massive bronze pillars named Jachin and Bows that stand at its entrance, the Bronze Sea, a large water basin supported by 12 bronze oxen, the gold-covered cherubim spreading their wings over the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. Despite the centralization of worship represented by the temple, local religious practices continue throughout Israel. High places, Bamot, local shrines often on hilltops, remain important centers of worship, though later biblical writers will condemn them as inappropriate once the temple is established. Archaeological evidence shows that these local shrines persisted well beyond Solomon's time, indicating the gap between official religious policy and actual practice. Your religious life encompasses not just formal observances, but a worldview that integrates spiritual understanding with everyday experience. Natural phenomena, rainfall, crop success or failure, illness, childbirth, death, are interpreted within a framework of divine reward and punishment. There is no concept of natural causes distinct from divine activity. Yahweh is seen as the immediate cause of events, whether beneficial or destructive. This perspective provides explanatory power in a world without scientific understanding, but also creates existential challenges when misfortune strikes. If a child dies, if crops fail, if illness persists, these are not just practical hardships, but potentially indications of divine displeasure or punishment. The question, "What did I do wrong?" haunts many who suffer in this theological framework. The religious system provides ritual responses to these challenges: sacrifices for sin, purification rituals, vows, and offerings to seek divine favor. While the major sacrifices are now theoretically centralized at the temple, many purification rituals and minor offerings continue at the local level, performed without priestly oversight. Your personal religious practice includes daily prayers, though these are not yet formalized as they will be in later Judaism. You might recite portions of the Shema when rising and before sleeping, offer brief prayers before meals, or speak spontaneous prayers in moments of need or gratitude. These practices vary widely across families and communities, lacking the standardization that will develop in later centuries. Religious specialists occupy important positions in this society. Priests, Kohanim, from the tribe of Levi, serve at the temple and larger shrines, performing sacrifices and interpreting religious law. However, other religious roles exist outside the official priesthood. Local wise people known for their ability to interpret dreams or signs, healers who combine herbal knowledge with prayer, and occasionally prophets who claim direct divine inspiration. These prophets represent a complex element in Israel's religious landscape. Some serve as court prophets, providing religious legitimation for royal policies. Others emerge from outside the established religious hierarchy, often offering critiques of the powerful and calling for return to what they see as authentic worship of Yahweh. During Solomon's reign, the prophetic movement is less prominent than it will become in later generations, when the divided kingdoms face greater political and military threats. As the Sabbath day continues, your family shares the special meal prepared the previous day. The food is similar to everyday fare, but perhaps with slightly larger portions or a rare inclusion of meat. The meal is eaten with awareness of its ritual significance, a commemoration of creation when God rested on the seventh day, and a celebration of Israel's liberation from Egyptian slavery when they were unable to rest. The afternoon brings informal visiting among neighbors, storytelling for children, and perhaps singing or simple games. These recreational aspects of the Sabbath provide crucial psychological respite in a life otherwise defined by constant labor. The prohibition against work creates space for community bonding, reflection, and the passing of cultural knowledge that might be neglected amid the press of survival tasks. As the sun begins to set, marking the end of the Sabbath, a brief ceremony called Havdalah, separation, marks the transition back to ordinary time. A blessing over wine if available, or another beverage if not, spices and fire, acknowledges the distinction between sacred and ordinary time. The rituals are simpler than they will become in later Jewish practice, but the conceptual framework is already established. Beyond the regular rhythm of Sabbath observance, your religious life is marked by major life transitions: birth, coming of age, marriage, and death. Each of these is accompanied by rituals that integrate the individual experience into the community's religious framework. Birth brings purification rituals for the mother, and for male infants, circumcision on the 8th day as the sign of the covenant. This ancient practice predates Israelite identity, but has been incorporated as a central marker of belonging to the covenant community. The procedure is performed without anesthesia or modern surgical techniques, using flint knives as mentioned in early biblical accounts, though metal implements are becoming more common in Solomon's time. Coming of age is less formally marked than in later Jewish tradition, but practical transitions occur as children take on adult responsibilities. Boys begin to participate more fully in communal worship, while girls prepare for the adult female roles of marriage and childbearing. Marriage involves contractual arrangements between families and blessings that emphasize fertility and the continuation of the family line. The primary public ceremony centers on the bride's procession to the groom's household, accompanied by friends and family. After the public celebration, the marriage is consummated with the blood-stained cloth from the wedding night, sometimes preserved as evidence of the bride's virginity. A matter of significant social and economic importance in this patrilineal society, death brings the most elaborate ritual responses, reflecting the profound disruption it represents to family and community. Bodies are prepared for burial by washing and wrapping in shrouds without embalming. Burial typically occurs on the day of death or the following day, necessitated by the warm climate and lack of preservation methods. Tombs, for those who can afford them, consist of rock-cut chambers where bodies decompose on stone benches. After decomposition, the bones are collected and placed in ossuaries, bone boxes, or simply pushed to the back of the tomb to make room for new burials. Poorer families use simple pit graves marked with stone piles or crude markers. Mourning rituals are extensive tearing of garments, wearing of sackcloth, sitting on the ground, wailing and lamenting, abstaining from regular activities. The formal mourning period lasts 7 days for close family members, though the full mourning process for parents or spouses extends much longer. These practices serve both psychological and social functions, creating space for grief and marking the transition of social roles following a death. Beyond these major life transitions, religious thinking shapes your approach to illness and healing. Without understanding of germ theory or modern medicine, illness is frequently attributed to divine punishment for sin, attacks by malevolent spirits, or the evil eye malicious intent from others. The boundaries between what modern people would consider medicine, magic, and religion are fluid in this ancient context. Healing practices consequently include both practical remedies, herbal preparations, setting of broken bones, lancing of abscesses, and spiritual interventions such as prayer, the use of amulets, and ritual purifications. Many healing practices combine elements of both, such as applying a medicinal poultice while reciting specific prayers or incantations. Despite the biblical prohibitions against divination and certain magical practices, archaeological evidence suggests that many Israelites incorporated protective magic into their religious practice. Small figurines, amulets, and inscribed blessings have been found in Israelite homes from this period, indicating that whatever the official religion prescribed, ordinary people sought spiritual protection through multiple channels. This pragmatic approach to religious practice reflects the precarious nature of life in ancient Israel. With limited technological buffers against natural disasters, disease, and human conflict, spiritual practices provided both psychological comfort and a sense of agency in the face of overwhelming forces. As the day ends and your family prepares for sleep, prayers are offered for protection through the night. Darkness in the ancient world brought very real dangers: human intruders, predatory animals, fire hazards from oil lamps, as well as the perceived threats of malevolent spirits believed to be more active at night. Simple prayers for divine protection acknowledge both human vulnerability and trust in divine care. Your understanding of the afterlife remains vague and undeveloped compared to later religious traditions. The Hebrew Bible of this period contains few explicit teachings about life after death. The common conception involves a shadowy existence in Sheol, a dim underworld where the dead continue a reduced form of consciousness. This is neither a place of punishment nor reward, simply the common destination of all humanity. The elaborate concepts of heaven and hell that will develop in later religious traditions are absent from your worldview. Instead, religious hope centers on the continuation of family lineage, the prosperity of the nation of Israel, and God's blessing in this life. The covenant promises focus on descendants as numerous as the stars, possession of the land, and divine protection for the nation, rather than individual afterlife rewards. This religious framework focused on covenant, law, ritual purity, and communal identity provides the essential structure for understanding both everyday experiences and historical events. When droughts occur, when enemies threaten, when illness strikes, these are interpreted as consequences of covenant faithfulness or betrayal, both individually and collectively. As you drift toward sleep on this Sabbath evening, your religious identity provides something rarely experienced in the modern secular world, a comprehensive framework that integrates every aspect of life into a coherent narrative of meaning. Despite the hardships of life in ancient Israel, or perhaps because of them, this religious worldview offers orientation, purpose, and community in the face of a challenging and often unpredictable existence. Part 5. The Tale of Adnah, Survival Against All Odds. In the small village of Tirzah, nestled in the hill country north of Jerusalem, lived a woman named Adnah. Her story exemplifies both the extraordinary hardships and the remarkable resilience of ordinary people during Solomon's reign, a tale largely absent from the grand historical narratives, focused on kings, prophets, and military campaigns. Adnah's life began inauspiciously as the third daughter in a family hopping for sons. In a society where male children represented economic security and continuation of the family line, daughters were often seen as economic burdens, requiring dowries for marriage and unable to inherit property. While not unloved, Adnah grew up with an acute awareness of her lesser status, working from early childhood to contribute to a household that viewed her primarily as a temporary member who would eventually join another family through marriage. At age 12, Adnah was betrothed to a man in his mid-20s from a neighboring village. Such age disparities were common, with girls typically marrying soon after puberty, while men married later after establishing some economic foundation. The marriage was arranged by the male heads of the families, with no input from Adnah, a transaction involving a bride price paid to her father and negotiations about what possessions she would bring to her new household. Shortly before her wedding at age 13, disaster struck Adnah's family. Her father and older brother were killed in a flash flood while working in the terraced fields after an unseasonable downpour. In an instant, the family's primary providers and protectors were gone, leaving her mother, her younger siblings, and Adnah herself in an extremely vulnerable position. In the absence of social safety nets or government support systems, sudden deaths of male providers frequently plunged families into destitution. Without adult male members, the family couldn't effectively work their small land holding or protect their property rights. The biblical laws included provisions for the care of widows and orphans, but the practical implementation of these protections varied greatly, particularly in rural areas away from centers of authority. Adna's impending marriage became even more critical for her family's survival. Her bride price had already been paid, providing some resources for her mother and siblings, but without male protection, their situation remained precarious. Her mother faced limited options: remarriage, often to her late husband's brother, following the practice of levirate marriage, dependency on more distant male relatives, or gradual impoverishment as she struggled to maintain the family with limited resources. As Adna moved to her husband Iton's household, she carried both the normal anxieties of a young bride and the additional burden of concern for her birth family's uncertain future. The wedding celebration was subdued due to the recent deaths, but proceeded nonetheless. The practical necessities of survival didn't allow for extended mourning periods in this subsistence-level society. Life in Iton's household brought new challenges. Adna now lived under the authority of her mother-in-law, a stern woman who had lost several children in infancy and had grown hardened by life's difficulties. As the newest and youngest female in the household, Adna was assigned the most difficult and unpleasant tasks: carrying water from the distant spring, grinding grain for hours each day, and cleaning animal pens. These challenges would be familiar to many young brides in ancient Israel. The transition to a husband's household was often traumatic, involving separation from everything familiar and placement at the bottom of a new family hierarchy. Physical and emotional abuse was not uncommon, with young brides having little recourse or protection beyond what their birth families might try to provide from a distance. Adna's value in her new household depended primarily on her ability to conceive and bear children, particularly sons. When she failed to become pregnant during the first year of marriage, her position became increasingly tenuous. Her mother-in-law began suggesting that Iton had been cheated in the marriage arrangement, receiving a barren wife despite the bride price paid. The stigma of childlessness fell entirely on women in ancient Israel, regardless of the actual biological cause of infertility. Without modern medical understanding, infertility was typically viewed as divine punishment or a defect in the woman. For Adna, the mounting pressure to conceive created psychological distress that likely further reduced her chances of pregnancy, creating a vicious cycle of anxiety and disappointment. In the middle of the second year of marriage, Iton was conscripted for his regular service in Solomon's labor force, the corvée system that required every able-bodied man to work 1 month in 3 on royal projects. He was assigned to the copper mines at Timnah in the southern Araba Valley, a particularly dangerous and undesirable posting far from home. The copper mines represented some of the harshest working conditions in Solomon's kingdom. Workers toiled in narrow, poorly ventilated shafts, extracting ore in sweltering heat with primitive tools. Accidents were common: cave-ins, falls, tool injuries, and the physical toll of such labor shortened many lives. The mines were often staffed with a combination of corvée workers and slaves, with little distinction in their treatment during the work period. When news reached Adna's village that Eitan had been killed in a mine collapse, her already precarious position became truly desperate. As a childless widow, she held minimal status in her husband's family and could easily be sent away, having failed to produce the children that were her primary purpose in the marriage alliance. Levirate marriage, the practice whereby a brother of the deceased husband would marry his widow to maintain the family line, offered one potential source of security. However, Eitan's only brother was still a child, making this option unavailable to Adna. Her mother-in-law, bitter at the loss of her son and viewing Adna as having brought bad fortune to the family, made it clear that she was no longer welcome in the household. At 15, Adna found herself in the most vulnerable position possible for a woman in ancient Israel, widowed, childless, and rejected by her husband's family. Her options were severely limited. She could return to her birth family, but they were struggling with their own survival after the deaths of her father and brother. She could seek to remarry, but as a widow with a suspected fertility problem, her prospects were poor. The precariousness of her situation reflects the limited options available to women without male protection in this society. Biblical law included provisions for gleaning rights, allowing the poor to collect leftover grain from the edges of fields. But this provided bare subsistence at best. The alternative was often begging, or in desperate cases, prostitution, with all the physical dangers and social ostracism these entailed. Adna initially returned to her mother's household, but found the family struggling to maintain even their diminished standard of living. The small plot of land they had once farmed was being gradually encroached upon by neighbors who recognized their vulnerability. And without male advocates, they had little recourse to the village elders who adjudicated such disputes. It was in this desperate situation that Adna made an unusual and risky decision that would reshape her life. She had always shown an aptitude for herbal knowledge, learning from the village midwife which plants could ease pain, reduce fever, or help with digestive ailments. This knowledge was typically passed down from woman to woman, forming a parallel tradition of practical wisdom alongside the more formal, male-dominated religious and legal systems. Adna began to expand this knowledge, experimenting carefully with different preparations and observing their effects. She took particular interest in herbs that could help with women's health issues, painful menstruation, difficulties in conception, complications in pregnancy and childbirth. These were areas of great concern in a society where women's primary value was tied to reproduction. Yet, formal medical knowledge was minimal. Her work began simply, with Adna offering herbal remedies to other women in exchange for food or small items of value. Her youth initially made many skeptical, but as some of her treatments proved effective, her reputation slowly grew. She was careful to integrate religious elements into her practice: prayers, ritual purifications, references to biblical precedents, to avoid any suspicion of improper magical practices, which could lead to dangerous accusations. This path was not without significant risks. The line between accepted healing practices and forbidden divination or sorcery was ambiguous and subjectively interpreted. Women who developed too much independent authority, particularly in areas touching on fertility and reproduction, could face community suspicion or outright accusations of witchcraft. The biblical injunction, "You shall not permit a sorceress to live," Exodus 22:18, represented a very real threat to women operating outside established authority structures. Adna navigated these dangers carefully, always presenting her work as an extension of traditional women's knowledge rather than any special power of her own. She attributed successful treatments to God's blessing rather than her own skill, and made sure to maintain appropriate deference to male authorities and religious leaders in the community. Gradually, her practice expanded beyond her immediate village. Women would travel considerable distances to seek her help, particularly for fertility issues or difficulties in pregnancy. In a world where maternal and infant mortality were frighteningly common, any perceived advantage in the dangerous process of childbirth was eagerly sought. Adna's work provided her not just with economic survival, but with an unusual degree of independence for a woman in her society. While she remained technically under the authority of her mother as the head of their household, her practical autonomy grew as her economic contribution became essential to the family's survival. Over time, she developed particular expertise with a specific challenge: obstructed labor during childbirth. Through careful observation and the knowledge passed to her by older midwives, she learned techniques for turning bobbies in the womb to facilitate delivery. While primitive by modern standards, her methods notably increased survival rates for both mothers and infants in complicated deliveries. This skill brought Adna to the attention of wider circles, eventually including officials connected to Solomon's court. In the 7th year of Solomon's reign, one of his many wives, a minor foreign princess taken as part of a diplomatic alliance, experienced a difficult labor that the court physicians seemed unable to resolve. With the situation growing desperate, Adna was summoned to Jerusalem as a last resort. The journey to Jerusalem itself was significant. Few common people from rural villages ever saw the capital city, especially women, who rarely traveled far from their home villages. The approximately 3-day journey represented the farthest Adna had ever ventured from her birthplace. Her arrival at Jerusalem revealed a world entirely different from her village experience. The city under Solomon was experiencing unprecedented construction and expansion. The temple had been completed, and work continued on the royal palace complex, administrative buildings, and expanded fortifications. The scale of these projects was staggering to someone accustomed to the simple stone structures of rural villages. The wealth disparity between common Israelites and the royal court became immediately apparent. Solomon's palace featured cedar paneling, gold decorations, and imported luxury goods that represented more wealth than Adna's entire village would see in generations. The king's lifestyle, with his reported 1,000 wives and concubines, lavish feasts, and exotic possessions like apes and peacocks brought by trading ships, existed in a different universe from the subsistence farming and simple barter economies of rural communities. This gap between royal splendor and common hardship reflected the transformation occurring during Solomon's reign. The relatively egalitarian tribal society was evolving into a more stratified kingdom with clear class distinctions. The resources required to maintain the king's court and building projects, extracted through taxation and forced labor, created new economic pressures on common Israelites, even as the nation experienced greater international prestige and trade connections. Within the palace, Adna was brought to the royal women's quarters, where the laboring princess struggled. The court physicians, trained in Egyptian and Mesopotamian medical traditions that included a mix of practical techniques and magical incantations, had already tried their standard approaches without success. The situation had grown dire, with the young woman weakening after many hours of unproductive labor, drawing on her experience and practical knowledge. Adna assessed the situation and determined that the baby was positioned incorrectly for delivery. Using techniques developed through years of observation and practice, she managed to turn the infant, allowing for a difficult but successful delivery. Both mother and child survived, an outcome that seemed increasingly unlikely before her intervention. This success brought Adna unexpected reward and recognition. The grateful father of the princess, a minor king from a neighboring territory, provided her with a substantial gift of silver. More significantly, her proven skill led to an unusual proposition, an offer to remain in Jerusalem as a midwife, serving the royal household and noble families of the city. For a village woman of humble origins, particularly one who had faced the vulnerable status of a childless widow, this represented an extraordinary opportunity. Life in Jerusalem offered material comfort, protection, and status unimaginable in her village context. Yet it also meant separation from her family and the familiar rhythms of rural life. After consideration, Adna made a surprising choice. Rather than remaining in Jerusalem permanently, she negotiated an arrangement whereby she would divide her time, spending portions of the year in the capital while returning regularly to her village. This unusual compromise reflected both practical wisdom and emotional ties to her family and community of origin. With the silver she had received, Adna was able to make transformative changes to her family's circumstances. She purchased additional land for her mother's household and arranged marriages for her younger sisters with more favorable terms than would otherwise have been possible. Most significantly, she established herself in a position that combined respected expertise with economic security, a rare achievement for a woman in ancient Israel. Over the following years, Adna continued this dual existence between village and capital. In Jerusalem, she attended births among the noble families and continued to develop her medical knowledge, gaining exposure to Egyptian and Mesopotamian healing traditions through the cosmopolitan nature of Solomon's court. In her village, she trained other women in midwifery and herbal medicine, creating a network of practitioners who shared knowledge and supported one another. Adna never remarried, an unusual choice in a society where women's identities were defined primarily through their relationships to men as daughters, wives, and mothers. Instead, she adopted several orphan children, creating a non-traditional household that nonetheless found acceptance due to her valued role in the community and her economic self-sufficiency. Her story represents an extraordinary exception to the typical life trajectory for women in ancient Israel. Most women would never experience the degree of autonomy, geographic mobility, or economic independence that Adna achieved. Her exceptional circumstances, initially born of tragedy and vulnerability, led to opportunities that would have been unimaginable had she followed the expected path of marriage, childbearing, and life within a traditional family structure. Yet even in her exceptional status, Adna remained subject to the fundamental constraints of her society. She never achieved formal recognition equal to male physicians or religious authorities. Her practice remained firmly within the women's sphere, focused on childbirth and women's health issues. She needed to carefully navigate religious expectations and social hierarchies to maintain her unusual position. Adna's story survived in oral tradition within the community of women healers she helped establish, passed down alongside the practical knowledge of herbal remedies and birthing techniques. While not recorded in the official histories, focused on kings, military campaigns, and religious developments, her impact on the lives of ordinary women, both noble and common, represented a significant legacy in its own right. The tale of Adna reminds us that behind the grand biblical narratives and archaeological remnants of monumental architecture lie countless unrecorded stories of ordinary people navigating the harsh realities of ancient life with resourcefulness and courage. For every Solomon, with his legendary wisdom and wealth, thousands of common Israelites like Adna struggled, adapted, and occasionally transcended the severe limitations of their world through intelligence.